Okay, let's go ahead and get rolling. A couple of logistics to start. I will send you a link to a recording of this presentation, so no need to take intense notes. And if you have any questions, please chat them into the box to the right of this presentation, and I will address as many as I'm able to at the end. If I don't get to your specific question, don't worry. Someone from my team or I will personally follow up with you and make sure that your question gets answered. Okay, hello again everyone, and thanks for tuning into this webinar. This is James Alston from the Memphis Web Guys, and today I've got the great pleasure of talking with you about how you can make a series of small, easy fixes to your website that will, when you add them up, make it a much more effective tool for your business. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's start off by answering the why. Why should your business bother with its website? I want to address this question for a few reasons. First and foremost, small businesses are notorious for having a set it and forget it approach to their website, and if you were at our seminar, you remember that I brought up the Field of Dreams picture, and the quote from that movie is, "If you build it, they will come," and that just doesn't work in the website world. And it's regrettable, but it's also understandable for small businesses because they're busy, they're strapped for cash, and their website gets pushed to the bottom of their priorities. So the second reason that I want to address the why bother question is because of the rise of social media. And basically out there, there's a false notion that social networks, Facebook in particular, have made websites obsolete and unnecessary, and this just isn't true. Sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google Plus are great platforms, but they're not replacements for a solid web presence that you own and that you control. Because a business's website is its foundation in the internet world, the digital world out there, all other internet marketing tactics are built on top of it. So to continue with this metaphor, if you have a weak foundation, you compromise the integrity and the effectiveness of your other marketing efforts. Lastly, there are two simple, pragmatic reasons to direct your scarce resources to your website. And the first one is that it's really easy to make small, incremental changes that have a really big impact on your site's effectiveness. And number two, the energy you devote to your website pays significant dividends because so few of your competitors of small businesses are doing anything at all. Most small businesses have dusty, cobweb-filled websites that haven't been updated since the day they were launched. So it's pretty easy to stand out with just a little effort. Okay, that was a long introduction. Thanks for bearing with me. Now let's get to the meat of the presentation, the stuff that you can do today to make your website better. And I've organized these tips into a few different categories, and we're going to start with typography and design. Now, most of you will understand the need for good imagery and graphics and layout. But if we're talking about how to make small changes that will produce the biggest impact, typography is probably the best place to start. Because here's the truth. Most websites have terrible, and I mean terrible typography, and that is no exaggeration. And why does typography matter? It matters because it profoundly affects how your prospects interact with your messaging. What's more, because of how people read online, they read in short, fragmented bursts, much different than a newspaper or a magazine. Your typography can determine how much of your message gets through to your audience. So to make sure that your content is accessible and as powerful as possible, you want to make sure that it's easy to scan so that people can get a clear idea of what you're communicating in just a very brief glance, because that's all they're going to do. Just very brief. If you can't grab their attention and it looks good, they're going to leave. So here's the thing, as strange as it sounds, by making your copy scannable, you're going to encourage more thorough reading. Seriously, things like headings and subheadings, bulleted lists, and formatted text. These things act as hooks and barbs that draw the eye and channel people's attention into your content. Without these hooks and barbs on your page, your audience they're apt to glaze over your text and just click away. Another surefire way to boost the impact of your messaging is to make it easier to read. What a concept, right? It's funny that something so simple is just so rare on the web. Even great designers overlook this part. To improve the readability of your web page copy, make sure that your font is no smaller than 14 pixels. Also, make sure that you have adequate white space between your lines of text, because if you don't have enough, readers get fatigued and they lose focus, and they're going to stop absorbing your message. If you're not sure what specs your type should have, you should check out this really cool tool called the Golden Typography Calculator. You can just do a Google search for it. It's pretty easy to find. And that's going to help you find the optimal settings from an aesthetic and readability standpoint for your text. Okay, again, here's an image to reinforce the importance of having optimized fonts, sizing, and line height. So we've got the actual font size itself and the line height, which is the space between the lines here. Okay, more typography tips. 2 important ones. Number 1, don't use more than 2 fonts for your body copy. Most of the time you just want to use 1. Any more than 2 and your page starts looking cluttered and fragmented, which obviously is going to torpedo reader engagement. And number 2, use common fonts for your website. Most browsers are getting better at rendering fancy typefaces, but you never know what kind of browser that your customers are using. They're probably using an old and outdated version of Internet Explorer. So you need to choose your fonts with universal accessibility in mind. Okay, one last small but important typography tip. Don't use underlines to emphasize words. In the language of the web, underlines denote hyperlinks. So don't add underlines to words unless you want users to think that it's a link. Okay, moving on. Now let's take a few moments to talk about some of the simplest and most important design tips that will have the largest impact in terms of your website's overall effectiveness. And also, don't worry, we're going to start moving a little quicker through these tips so that you can all get back to your busy schedules. All right, number 1, include your name and logo on every page and make the logo a link to the homepage. This has become standard operating procedure in web design, and that in and of itself is a good reason to do the same. And I'll explain why in the next slide. Number 2, use a consistent navigational structure throughout your site, and this will improve usability and ensure that visitors can browse your site without getting lost and or frustrated. So here's a good example of a website that follows both of the best practices that I just mentioned. Having a consistent navigational structure and a logo on every single page. So on the home page, here is the navigational structure, and here is the logo up here. And once you click on any of the buttons here, the navigational structure moves to the very top, and it stays consistent on every single page. And again, your logo is in the same place no matter what. Okay. All right, everybody. This slide is very important. As a general rule, it is best to keep your website design close to the standard for your industry. Don't reinvent the wheel. Anything that's on the fringes of what people are used to, it's going to backfire, guaranteed. This concept was popularized by usability pioneer Jakob Nielsen. Users form their expectations for your site based on what's commonly done on most other sites. If you deviate, your site will be harder to use and users will leave. I'm not saying that your website shouldn't be remarkable, but it should be remarkable for its messaging, for its polish, for its usefulness, but not for its novelty. Because on the web, novelty is taxing, and the last thing that you want to do is tax your audience. All right, photography. It is so important. The web is, after all, a visual medium. But you look around and you don't see businesses taking advantage of the huge canvas they're given to showcase their products, services, and company. The good news for you then is that even small improvements to the quality of your imagery will dramatically improve your website relative to the competition. To that end, 2 simple tips for improving your imagery. Don't use distorted or grainy photos, and avoid using stock photography whenever possible. The reason stock photos, which are typically glossy and impersonal, they dilute the key advantages that small businesses have over large businesses, and that is authenticity and personality. Everyone knows what a stock photo looks like when they see one, and there's a disconnect there, especially if someone's looking at a local business's website, and you want to make it authentic. Okay, well, taking great photos is easier than it's ever been. I mean, seriously, if you have a smartphone, all you need is the free Instagram app, and you can snap tons of cool images in minutes. I also know a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but a few very good photographers that are very affordable, and I refer my clients to them often, so you can always ask me for some referrals there. Okay, so I just put this website up here to show you a great example of photography and how it looks on a page, although it's I lost some graininess in translation here when I moved it to the PowerPoint, but at any rate, it still looks really good. On the website itself, it looks very clean and clear and crisp. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the changes that you can make to your site content to make it a more productive contributor to your bottom line. Okay, the first tip on this page comes directly from Jakob Nielsen, the usability expert that I mentioned earlier. Put your company tagline next to your logo on every page of your site in the header. Now, this simple change can work wonders in terms of clarifying your value proposition, which brings clarity to your visitors on whether or not you can solve their problem. Anytime you bring clarity to your prospects is a huge win for your website. Many visitors are going to come to your website and they're not going to come to the home page first. And if you do not have your tagline in the header on every single page, then they can easily get confused. Secondly, you should definitely have a bold, and I mean bold as in direct and persuasive, headline on your homepage that welcomes visitors and tells them exactly what you sell and how it can help them. It's crazy how many businesses neglect this basic element. If this tip sounds blindingly obvious and you already have a benefit-focused headline on your homepage, give yourself a pat on the back. You're in a small and elite group. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Logo and very clean, crisp, clear tagline. Okay, so earlier we talked about how your typography impacts how people interact with your content. So now let's talk about other ways to improve your messaging and to make it easier for prospects to get answers to their questions and understand your pitch. Number one, use short, simple, declarative sentences. Easy to understand words and phrases. Avoid long paragraphs. Number two. People read differently on the web, like I was telling you earlier. They're goal-driven, which means they don't have the patience to wade through long paragraphs. That's important to remember. They're scanners. So here's a tip for reaching these impatient visitors. When you're writing or editing your content, regularly ask yourself the question, would a 9-year-old understand what I'm talking about? And make sure that the answer is yes, and that this is going to be challenging. It's all easy to let the words pour out, throw around your industry jargon and fancy puffed up terminology, and we are geared that way. I mean, that makes us sound like we know what we're talking about, and we do. I mean, if you're an expert in your field, you do know what you're talking about, but it's so important to simplify your message. Boil it down to the essentials. That's the best way to make sure that your pitch, it not only gets through to your audience, but it stays planted in their mind. Okay, here's another tip that perhaps a few of you will think is too obvious, but I see countless websites that ignore this basic marketing principle. Issue a call to action to your prospects. Here's a fact. No one is getting into your sales funnel unless you show them where it is. And that means making sure your website has prominent and clear calls to action that appeal to your audience's interests. And depending on what you sell, you may need to include calls to action for varying levels of commitment. For example, if you sell a complex, big-ticket product or service, some of your calls to action might be to download a free report, or to watch a video, or to subscribe to a newsletter. And if your products have low price points, you better paint your website with buy now and add to cart buttons. The larger point is this: your visitors should know exactly what they should do when they arrive at your site. Here's a good example of a good call to action. Notice the visual emphasis. The bottom button is almost, if not more, prominent than the logo up top. As a side note, this is another good example of an image you wouldn't want to use on your website. See how grainy it is? It's not very clear, but I didn't really care about that too much for our presentation purposes here. Okay. All right, let's move right along. As I mentioned earlier, your website is the foundation of your larger online presence. It's a great idea to leverage it to drive engagement with other parts of your online portfolio, like your Facebook page and your blog. Secondly, and this one is very important, consider publishing a regular e-newsletter and adding a sign-up form to your website. I could give an entire webinar on the value of newsletters, but for now, I'll just quote my favorite usability guy, Jacob Nielsen. If you don't have a newsletter, then publishing one is probably the single highest return on investment action that you can take to improve your internet presence. So this is another tip to file under the make things easier for your readers category. The inverted pyramid structure is the most efficient way to tell a story when you know your audience may not stick around until the end. It means getting to the overall point as quickly as you can, and then, and only then, adding more detail as you progress. The inverted pyramid structure guarantees that your readers will take away the key points even if they only read the first 30 words of your copy. And you can always ask me more about the inverted pyramid structure later if you send me an email or contact me. Okay, here's another tip that seems minor at first, but it can be really effective. As I said earlier, small businesses have a huge advantage over larger competitors. They have character, they have personality. So putting photos of your employees, I mean, even if it's just you and your dog on your About page, that's a great way to capitalize on this inherent strength. More on the About page. This is a very, very important page. It's perhaps the most powerful one on the site. Many times it's the most visited page on your site. So it's a great idea to squeeze as much from it as possible. To that end, be sure to include any calls to action, such as newsletter opt-in form. On the Memphis Web Guys, we have a webinar opt-in. Okay, so we're on to the last category of improvements. Thank you for your patience so far. We're going to talk about how to make your site more user-friendly. And we are going to start with the most basic principle, usability. Okay, the basic principle of usability is this. Give users what they want. Make life easy for them. That means taking the time to identify their goals when they arrive at your site and then shape your content accordingly. Part of this effort will be intuitive, and other parts might be more quantitative. Maybe you look at your analytics and notice that your contact page is far and away the most visited page on your site, in which case you might consider placing your content information right on the home page to save visitors some time. In fact, for most small businesses, I recommend doing that regardless. Every single small business should have their phone number in the upper right-hand corner of their header on every single page. Another approach is to conduct some interviews with your prospects and current customers and get their input. The point is, your website will better serve your own goals if you place your goals second to your visitors' goals. Okay. Here's a small tweak that will help your visitors a lot. Make sure that you let your users know where they've been using, let me see. Make sure that you let your users know how to distinguish between visited and unvisited links. And that sounds innocuous, but it's one of the few universally agreed upon standards among usability experts. If you see a link that has a different color, then you know that you've been there. Simple enough. Okay, we've already covered this idea, but I want to stress it further. For some reason, people feel like they can only put the contact info on their contact page, but it's my belief that you should make it as easy as possible for prospects and customers to get in touch with you. The most straightforward way to do this is to put your phone number at the top of every page. So here's a good example of what I'm talking about. This site, Rooter Now, is making it easy for their customers to contact them. Okay, here is a personal pet peeve of mine. If you have a bad search function, Freudian slip there, on your website, get rid of it. There is nothing more frustrating for users who can't find what they're looking for to use a search feature that doesn't deliver any kind of good results. Unless you've embedded Google custom search on your site, the chances are pretty good that your search feature is lacking, and I suggest ditching your search feature, especially if you're a small business and your site isn't very big. just it's not necessary. You can make it very clear where you want your customers and your prospects and your visitors to go without the use of that. Okay, here's another tip that I'm sure that all of you will understand and agree with. You want to limit your use of PDFs. Studies have shown that people really don't like toggling back and forth between a normal web page and a PDF document. It breaks their flow, makes them more likely to leave your site. All right. Fortunately, let's see, the use of Flash has diminished, and businesses are less apt to put these annoying Flash animations on their homepages. But there are still some offenders out there. Except in rare cases, Flash will probably just add visual clutter and distraction to your pages, so I suggest getting rid of it. Another suggestion, if you operate a brick and mortar type of business, embed a Google map on your contact page, and that's going to make it easier for your visitors to get driving directions to your store. Also, employing some basic SEO tactics will help your site gain prominence in the search results, and I've done a whole webinar on SEO, some basic things that you can do that are simple that can really improve your visibility. They're pretty easy to execute, and they go a long way. The first is make sure that you have unique and accurate meta and title tags for each page on your site, and these are the chunks of text that display in the search results. So keep in mind that they have to appeal to humans too, not just algorithms. Second way to get more search engine visibility is to regularly update your site with high value content that your customers can use. And blogs are a very effective way to do this. Fresh, dynamic content, Google loves it. Okay, so here are my parting usability tips. Number one, make sure that your site loads fast. For one thing, people are impatient, and every second counts on the web. Second, your page load time impacts your SEO, so make sure that you have a fast loading site. And number two, I jumped up too fast there. If you run a retail or a service business that gets a fair amount of mobile traffic, it is a really good idea to create a mobile version of your site so that people who access it via smartphone or tablet, web browser have a good experience and can find what they're looking for. So if you were at the seminar, you saw some examples that I put up on the big screen about this. People get frustrated if they're on their mobile phone and they can't even see what they're looking at, and they have to scroll in or use their fingers and kind of zoom in. All right, that's it. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope this has been helpful. I really appreciate the time that you took out of your busy schedule to be with me here today. So please take what you've learned and apply one thing today, one thing tomorrow, and in no time your website will be a much bigger asset for your business. I guarantee you that it will be well worth your time. So here is our contact information. If you want to get in contact with us, we'd love to help. If we can be of service in any way, you can go to memphiswebguys.com. You can leave a voice message for us right there on our website. It'll come directly to my phone. You can send me an email at james@memphiswebguys.com, or you can call our business line at 901-451-9508. Okay, so let's open it up for a few questions. Okay. Got a couple queued up here. What content management system do you recommend for small businesses? That's an easy one for me. I say WordPress. It's an open source publishing platform that's pretty much become the de facto standard across the web. I'm not talking about WordPress.com. That's a multi-site. I'm talking about the self-hosted WordPress. And yes, it started as a blog, but you can make really, really nice full websites. It's powerful, flexible. Um, Big businesses have used it, as well as small mom and pop businesses. So I have heard recently a stat that more than 20% of all active websites on the internet are running WordPress. It's pretty awesome. Google has a love affair with WordPress because it's so easy for the spiders to crawl. So that's my recommendation, WordPress. All right, next question. How much time should I spend on SEO? Well, that one's hard to answer without knowing more about your situation. For some businesses, those in industries and markets that have high search traffic, SEO can be a very high return on investment form of marketing. For others, though, it may not be the best use of their budget and resources. It just depends. I will say, though, it makes sense for every business to do the basic blocking and tackling of SEO, just basic. So, and that means, having good meta and title tags, update your site regularly, so that you're training Google to index it regularly. You want to make sure that your site leverages some of the keywords that your audience uses when they search online for your products and services, and don't use silly keywords like your business name. I mean, people searching for your business name, they already know that you exist. So, and that's a whole nother webinar is talking about keywords and how to choose the right ones. So, okay. Hope that answered your question. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you so much for joining me today. And again, if you'd like some assistance putting these tips and strategies into action, then we'd love to help. Please just get in touch. Take care, and thanks again.